2017, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting when I'm watching the news or look at a newspaper, I can see what kind of pictures are there in the news story, and having been at press conferences where print media that are extremely slanted will come up with the photographer from those from such a media source will come up and get right in front and then start taking pictures and have their camera on nonstop, just click, 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 second after second. So you know they've got 100, 200 pictures. It's easy to know what they're doing. They're taking as many pictures as fast as they can, and you know that they're going to go through and they're going to take the picture in which your mouth is in the most contorted position, or where it looks like you're saying a word that would be inappropriate for an elected official to say. And you know that's the picture they're going to put up, trying to make you look as stupid as possible before you ever read the article. And for some of us, it's not difficult to make us look stupid. We can't help our looks, but you just know before you ever read the article, when you look at the picture, whether it's going to be a fair and objective article or whether it's going to be totally skewed and totally subjective. And I notice that too sometimes when friends across the aisle come with blow-up pictures. I can look at the pictures and tell whether it's going to be a fair and objective dissertation I'm going to hear from my fellow representatives across the aisle. But it's true of Republicans as well. I just don't see those type of skewed pictures very often at all, if at all, from Republicans. But anyway, it seems to be a good rule of thumb. You look at the pictures and you can tell whether it's going to be fair or it's going to be a total hit piece. But I've been very interested, though, to watch during the course of this last 9-10 months as we come through 2017, the story nonstop from representatives across the aisle has been about Russia, Russia, Russia. Sounds a bit like Sean Hannity, Russia, 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 but I guess I don't mind sounding like somebody I greatly admire. But isn't it interesting that in the revelations that have been coming out in the last few days, our friends across the aisle have not been as anxious to run down and talk about Russia, Russia, Russia. But somebody needs to talk about it. I've been talking about it for quite some time, and for most of this year have been pointing out that we actually need a special prosecutor, a special counsel to investigate former FBI Director Comey and to investigate the Clinton ties to Russia and the over $100 million in contribution that came from stockholders, apparently, of the Uranium One. It's just absolutely incredible. And what's amazing, though, there are bound to be so many fingers going out emanating from that deal, but we'd not seen or heard of them. We didn't know what was going on. And now we know that the FBI, headed by Director Robert Mueller, at the same time he was purging our FBI training materials of anything that offended radical Islamists that want to kill us. At the same time, he was not investigating properly tips about the older Sarniev being radicalized and that he was going to kill people. Because let's face it, that's when we get a tip that somebody's been radicalized as an Islamist, it means they're likely going to commit a terrorist act and try to take innocent lives, as Sarniev and his brother did. The FBI didn't properly investigate. They didn't know what to ask. They didn't know how to investigate whether or not somebody had been radicalized, because Robert Mueller had purged the training materials, so they couldn't know what to ask if somebody has been radicalized, or if they were a peace-loving Muslim, or they were a radical Islamist. Mueller prevented that from happening because he was so taken up with the idea of being friendly and neighborly. He called it his outreach program. And he even testified before our Judiciary Committee years ago, after I was there, about how he kept wanting to make the point that Muslim community is exactly like every other community. Every other community, the Muslim community is just like every other community. And he kept making that point over and over as Democrats asked him questions. And then he talked about his lovely outreach program with CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, that has ties that were named as co-defendants supporting terrorism with those who were actually convicted of supporting terrorism. And yet, even though the FBI had the evidence that convicted these supporting terrorists, and even though there was plenty of evidence that the people that he was trying to be friends with had radical terrorist ties, he continued his so-called outreach program as people were plotting to kill Americans, among those that he was trying to have meals with and be friendly with. But I asked him the question, you keep saying that the Muslim community here in America is just like every other community, and you're talking about your outreach program with the Muslim community. So I'd like to ask you, Director Mueller, how is your outreach program going with Jews and Catholics and Baptists and other religious groups? How are those outreach going? The Buddhists, how's your outreach program going with the Buddhists, Confucianists? And anyway, that was the basic question I asked. And of course, he was taken aback and he couldn't explain, because eventually we got the truth. There is no outreach program like that that the FBI had with any other religious group. So it's kind of disingenuous, if not to say dishonest, to say that a group that requires special attention and coddling is somehow exactly like every other group in America. No, they required special attention. At least that's what Robert Mueller thought. I don't think any religious group that believes in our Constitution and supports our Constitution requires any such special attention as Robert Mueller was giving the outreach partner CARE that has done so much damage to America and continues to undermine evidence to find, arrest, and convict radical Islamists. And it's normally like clockwork. As soon as a radical Islamist has committed a terrorist act, it really is. It's like clockwork. You can count on CAIR, C-A-I-R, not the kind that actually helps people around the world, but C-A-I-R, to be out there with a news conference saying, you know, this guy was not one of us. And but at some point, I hope that people who are Muslims will quit listening to CAIR and will listen to the words of a much wiser individual, President al-Sisi in Egypt, who stood in a room with imams and told them, we have got to get our religion back away from the radicals or they are going to destroy it. That's a courageous man. I don't find that kind of courage among the people that have these press conferences to deflect instead of helping us find and capture the radical Islamists before they kill too many people. They're out there trying to make it appear that they're not really radical Islamists, they're something else. No, they're radical Islamists. They clearly are. And I was kind of saddened that General Kelly ended up being the chief of staff for President Trump, because I thought he was starting out to do a superb job as Secretary of Homeland Security. It turns out, as some of us had warned, that during the Obama administration, all this blather about countering violent extremism, CVE, that found its way into legislation that this body passed. Let's don't call it fighting radical Islam, let's call it countering violent extremism. Well, some of us had figured out the game, and Michelle Bachmann was one of those people. Yes, it's not countering extremism, it's fighting radical Islam. Thank God President Trump is now occupying the Oval Office. He understood that ISIS was not just a JV team. They're people that are radical Islamists, and they would love to kill as many Americans as possible. And they didn't need to have their groups denigrated. They needed to have their groups destroyed. These were not people that were going to be rehabilitated. They were radical extremists that actually believe with all their heart that they win a place in paradise by killing innocent people. And if you really want to go back to why there is a copy, an English translation copy of the Quran in the Library of Congress that was purchased, owned by Thomas Jefferson, it was because he was negotiating with the radical Islamists, the Barbary pirates in North Africa, and he was so well educated, so well read, he couldn't understand why the Barbary pirates, who were radical Islamists, kept attacking American ships. You know, as he indicated, we're not a threat to you. We don't even have a navy to speak of. You know, we're not your enemy. We don't understand why you keep attacking American ships. And when he was told that under their belief system that those Islamists believe they went to paradise if they died killing what we would consider innocent people, and they consider people worthy of death, they go to paradise. And Jefferson, as well read as he was, he couldn't believe, you know, that there was any religion anywhere in the world that believed you could go to heaven or paradise if you're killed while you're killing innocent, unsuspecting people who are not military. They're not a threat to the radical Islamist life. yet they thought they were going to go to paradise and have 70 some odd virgins or so waiting for them. He couldn't believe it. So that's when he got his own copy of the Quran, because he just couldn't believe there was a religion that believed you could go to paradise if you're killing innocent people. So hopefully that will set the record with some folks who thought it showed how open-minded Thomas Jefferson was. Actually, he was quite open-minded. Some have tried to denigrate him because he had slaves. The man made plenty of mistakes, and one of them, it was an egregious wrong he did upon John Adams. They had been friends for years. It was Adams that asked him to do the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. And Jefferson was wise enough that when he did the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, if you look at the different grievances that he set out as to why they should be independent from England, it's like the longest paragraph grievance was about how King George had allowed slavery to ever start in America. And at the time, Virginia had a law making it illegal to free your own slaves. So he was law-abiding, but he believed that one of the worst things that ever happened to America was King George allowing slavery to start and exist in this country, that it was going to cause massive problems that would be very difficult to cure. And he was exactly right on all fronts. There's some even claiming that George Washington should have his name removed from schools or public places, when the fact is there would be no free America without George Washington having lived at the time he did. I believe with all my heart that George Washington was the man for such a time as that. Never been a man in all of history that led a military in a revolution, won the revolution, and then tendered his resignation, as we see down the hall, his outreached hand. I think is the most important scene in all of the Capitol. Massive mural. He's handing in his resignation. He sought no further power. He could have been king of America, emperor. There were a couple of coups they tried to involve him in. He stopped them. Anybody else in the world, we know from history, would not have done what he did. He was reluctant to take any power. And yet, because of his humility and his focus on creating a free and independent land, we have a free and independent land. Yes, he had slaves, but he was dealing with a Virginia where there was a law against freeing the slaves. But even so, he his will that their slaves would be free upon the death of his wife. Certainly, there were better ways to have done that. He was trying to abide by the law. But we just have such an incredible history. People like Washington, you know, some of us were attending an address by an author who had researched and done a biography on Benjamin Franklin over at the Library of Congress we were hearing. And someone asked him, you know, is there anybody you can think of in modern America that reminds you of Ben Franklin? And he said, actually, we've got many people that are witty, clever, very inventive. Yeah, Ben Franklin was an absolutely incredible man. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but he said it wasn't like he was George Washington. There was only one of those, you know, just only one of those. We had the director of the Society of Cincinnati speak at the Library of Congress on one occasion, and he was asked that since most biographers, the more they dig into the background of an individual, and he had studied Washington every year of his adult life, did he come to a point where he had less respect for Washington and he indicated that he could honestly say that in addition to knowing more about Washington every year of his adult life, that he had more respect and admiration and awe of George Washington with each passing year, with every bit of information he learned. That's the kind of incredible history we have, the kind of selflessness. People say, oh yeah, but Washington, look at the big payoff he got. He didn't take a salary, but boy, did he take a lot of money after the Revolution. Actually, he didn't take a salary. He didn't take a payoff. He was reimbursed some of his out-of-pocket expenses. He had been paying for spies to work for the country. He had paid so much out of his own pocket, and he was only seeking part of what he had come out of pocket, knowing that if the revolution failed, not only would he have been killed, but obviously his family would not have had all that money he spent. So I think that kind of puts in perspective when we start looking at people who are willing to sell off America's national security for millions of dollars. Well, you have to admire their appreciation for large amounts of money, but not at the price of selling our safety. So for all this year, I've been saying that Robert Mueller should never have accepted the role of special counsel, because we knew that James Comey was such a close, dear friend of his, and Comey was a witness central to this investigation. He could not be a fair arbiter, a fair investigator. He should have, if he had been properly morally inclined, he should have said, I can't be the special counsel because I'm too close, especially to Comey, to these people. Comey himself testified that before he testified up here to Congress, he talked to Mueller. There's a 2013 Washingtonian article that just a long, glowing piece on Comey, that in effect, if the world were burning down, the one person Comey would be right there with him would be Robert Mueller, standing with him. I mean, these guys were so close. He looked at Mueller as a mentor. They were really tight. It's a question in my mind, because of that tightness, since we know Comey leaked in order to, as he said, to try to get a special counsel. Did Mueller encourage him to do that? Was Mueller behind this setup to get a special counsel so he could be appointed, start making massive amounts of money, and hire all of these Republican-hating Democrats, contributors to Hillary Clinton, some of them? Wow, what a great setup for a guy that obviously held grudges against some Republicans. This is somebody that should not have been appointed, even though he was appointed to be director of the FBI by George W. Bush. You know, obviously, as hard as George W. Bush was trying to pick the right people, taking other advice, like his father's mistake in appointing David Souter, well, what a disaster that appointment turned out to be. He turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, appearing to act as one thing when we saw his teeth as he went to the Supreme Court. Edith Jones and David Souter came under consideration. I'd been told they were both sitting in the White House as President H.W. Bush tried to figure out which one to appoint. If he'd appointed Edith Jones, history would be totally different, and we would not have either Justice Kagan or Sotomayor, because who he appointed would never have resigned during President Obama's presidency. So those kind of mistakes have long-reaching effects. But President Bush appointed Mueller, and the more I find out, unlike Director Cincinnatus finding out about Washington and growing in awe and admiration, The more I find out about Robert Mueller, the more concerned I am. And the disclosures this week about what this man knew, what this man was involved in, what he did. See, I thought he was accepting the role of special counsel because of some possible revenge motive he had, dislike for some Republicans, and loved the idea of doing what Patrick Fitzgerald did, which happened to be not just a friend of James Comey. He was the godfather of a Comey child. And, of course, we find out later Comey recommended to Attorney General Ashcroft he should recuse himself so that he could appoint the godfather of his child, Patrick Fitzgerald, to be the special counsel. And we found out this year, well, Comey leaked information, which may or may not have been a crime. It needs to be investigated, in order to get a special counsel appointed. So he's using the same type of manipulative behavior as he did to get the godfather of his child appointed special counsel, in order to get the one guy that would be with him through thick and thin, no matter how got, Robert Mueller, get him appointed special counsel. Had no idea that Robert Mueller had been involved and been director of the FBI as they investigated Russia's efforts to corner the market on uranium and to spend millions and millions of dollars to acquire United States uranium. He's director of the FBI. They're investigating this. And even knowing that, it appears that he and now Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein actually covered up their investigation so that people would not get upset with Secretary Hillary Clinton for being an approver of the deal of selling America's uranium to an enemy of the United States. According to all the Democrats, for all this year, Russia is this big, horrible enemy, and how dare anybody do business with them? And it turns out that actually they were the ones who were involved in this terribly sordid business of selling our national security to the Russians. And the FBI had investigated. They had all of this information, and they even had an FBI informant, as Mueller knew, as director of the FBI. The informant had been working with the Russians. It was an undercover operation, perhaps the most important one the FBI had going on at that time. They did have the operation going on under Director Mueller of creating a fictitious case against Senator Ted Stevens, Republican from Alaska, in which they created evidence. They conspired to hide evidence that completely didn't just exonerate Ted Stevens. It showed that he was law-abiding, and they hid that evidence. And they manufactured a case that would cost him his Senate seat, which the loss of his Senate seat ended up putting him on a small plane that crashed, and he lost his life. As far as I know, there was no ties, the plane crash, to Mueller, but Mueller was the FBI director, and thank God that there was an FBI agent involved in that investigation, that after Ted Stevens was convicted, he couldn't stand it. His conscience would not allow him to sit quietly by after the FBI and the U.S. attorneys, but this FBI lead agent under Director Mueller as director was just fabricated a case. And it turns out not only did Ted Stevens not accept hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvements to his home without paying for them, he paid more, hundreds of thousands more than the improvements were worth. And apparently there was even evidence that they covered up where the contractor was going, look, Ted, you're paying more than this stuff we're charging you. And Stevens was saying, look, you know, I'm constantly being watched because people don't like my political positions, so I've got to be so far above and beyond ethical and moral that I got to pay more. Just accept the checks for overpayment. A guy overpaying, and yet they came after him knowing that this was an innocent man. They prosecuted him and convicted him. So after the whistleblower FBI agent comes forward, under Director Mueller's leadership, what happened? The informant was ordered to be kept from investigating any criminal cases, which meant he had no job at the FBI. And he went ahead and did as he was being pushed to do. He went ahead and resigned. Thank God for a man with a conscience like that. But his affidavit made clear that the lead agent had manufactured evidence and hidden evidence from the defense counsel because they had come in with warrants and taken everything, computer drives, thumb drives, documentary evidence, gone to the banks, gotten his document. He did not have any evidence to show how innocent he was because the FBI had taken it. Thank God. I mean, I know FBI agents that are the most honest people I've ever met. And we have thousands of them in this country, and thank God for them. But what did Director Mueller, under his leadership, what happened? Well, the whistleblower that exposed the fraudulent prosecutional misconduct, he gets run out of the FBI under Director Mueller. And what happened to the one who fabricated the evidence, fabricated the case, hid evidence that showed Ted Stevens' innocence? With Mueller as director, that FBI agent continued to get accolades and be moved on to investigate some of the most important cases the FBI had. That was Director Mueller. He also had a policy he created called the 5-year up or out policy that an article in the Wall Street Journal pointed out years ago, ended up destroying or running off thousands and thousands of years of experience from the FBI, weakening this incredible investigative body that, until Mueller got there, was the best investigative body in all of America. But after running off thousands of years of experienced FBI agents, so that he could have less experienced agents that would not have the experience to say, but Mr. Director, that would be a mistake. That was done in 1985 or 92 and it didn't work out. No, he had people that with no experience. And I know from being a prosecutor right out of law school, you're ready to put the bad guys away. You know, you're going to push the line to the limit. You're going to do your job, salute the flag. And it always helps to have experienced people around that can say, look, I know you mean well. That's not a good idea. Mueller liked to run those people off. He spent millions of dollars that some agents pointed out was being wasted on programs that were wasteful and ineffective. And now we know with what's coming out this week, I'm surprised how naive I continue to be. I thought Mueller accepted the job of special counsel to investigate the Russia-Trump alleged relationship because it would be a great job and he could carry out vendettas that he might have. That was so naive. Now we know that he had had an investigation of Russia, had an undercover informant for years working on the case, and that he covered up that investigation along with Rob Rosenstein so that Hillary Clinton could make this deal, approve the deal. And yes, there were other people that approved the deal. I believe the Attorney General, Eric Holder, also approved the deal and also helped cover up the investigation to show, the investigation would show from all the indications that Russia was committing crimes in America to get hold of our uranium. And knowing that, of course, if that investigation were made public, there's no way Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder could have approved the deal that was selling off 25% of America's uranium to the Russians. She could never have done that. And if she hadn't done that, there's not any doubt in some of our minds that the investors, the stockholders, ultimately of Uranium One, certainly would not have contributed over $100 million to the Clinton Foundation. And certainly Russia would not have been paying $500,000 for one short speech. Remarkably, it's hard to believe from State of the Union addresses he gave, but he actually could give a short speech and get $500,000 for one short speech. But he did. He didn't get paid that much on other speeches. What was so special? Could it be that Hillary Clinton was so critical in persuading others to sign on to allowing Uranium One to get so much of our uranium that, gee, perhaps that's why Russia was so emboldened? And then we find out there's more than that. The Democratic National Committee, we're told, they were helping pay for this dossier that just created the most lurid, ridiculous allegations against Donald Trump as a candidate, trying to destroy his presidency. And not only that, that the DNC was involved, and the Clinton campaign may have been involved, and the FBI gets involved with that, and it appears they may have used the DNC to pay for manufactured evidence that was absolutely false, that could be used to get the FBI under Mueller's control and the U.S. Attorney's Office under Rosenstein's control to go after the Trump administration or the Trump campaign and possibly get wiretaps based on the DNC Fusion GPS manufactured evidence. So going back to Mueller accepting the appointment as special counsel and possibly committing a crime the way he went about leaking private information to the New York Times. And it appears, if you look at his contacts and who reported what from the New York Times and what could have only been known by James Comey, it's possible he did that 6 other times. It's possible James Comey committed crimes in one or all of those 6 other leaking occasions, if he was the source, as it appears he may well have been now. So now it becomes more clear, in my naivety in thinking he had a personal motivation, Mueller having a personal motivation, including getting paid for a job he would love to do to go after people he didn't like in the Republican Party, including Donald Trump. But now it's becoming more clear. Comey needed Mueller to be a special counsel, and he admitted in testimony here, he leaked information, which may have been a crime. He leaked information in order to get a special counsel that he had to have known was going to be Robert. That his other friend, Robert Rosenstein, would certainly appoint Mueller, because Rosenstein and Mueller were involved in covering up the FBI's investigation of Russia and their efforts to get uranium. And if Mueller and Rosenstein hadn't covered up that and helped seal that information and gotten the informant to agree to a non-disclosure agreement, then Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation would be mega millions that they received as a result, it certainly appears, of the uranium transfer from the U.S. to Russia. So Mueller and Rosenstein and Comey all needed Mueller to be appointed, and Mueller needed to accept appointment as special counsel because he had to cover up the cover-up that he and Rosenstein had been involved in years earlier in order to facilitate the deal that was made to sell off our national security. Now, President Trump had this great plank in his platform as he ran for president that we need to bring in money that Americans have earned overseas back into the United States. Well, it's never been here, but bring it into the United States. But these American citizens and American companies have had to leave it in foreign banks and in foreign businesses and foreign countries, because in some countries they paid 50, 60, 70% tax on it. And if they bring it into the United States, they'll be required to pay probably 40% plus penalty and interest. So 35, 39% plus penalty and interest. They can't afford to do that, or they would be paying more tax than the money they earned. So they had to leave it in foreign countries and in foreign banks. And former FDIC Chairman Isaacs came to the Hill back when this doofus named Henry Paulson was telling us we had to give him $700 billion so he could buy mortgage-backed securities to save our economy. In our private conference call, I'll never forget, he said, I got to have $700 billion to buy these mortgage-backed securities because nobody knows what they're worth, and only the government has the wherewithal to buy those, hold them till they get value back, and that will save all these banks and keep them from going under, which would destroy the United States economy and take us back to a day worse than September of 1929. So you got to give me $700 billion to buy these mortgage-backed securities. And when we were allowed to punch in and ask a question, somebody in my party beat me to the question, and it was this. Well, Secretary Paulson, if nobody knows what these mortgage-backed securities are worth, how do you know you need $700 billion to buy them? I'll never forget his answer. And I quote, "We just needed a really big number." When I heard that, I knew that this bozo did not need $700 billion. We shouldn't have trusted him as Secretary of Treasury. But he got his $700 billion, and between him and Geithner, they bailed out their friends. They bailed out the big banks, while the community banks were being punished. They had to borrow money at a regular rate, and they made sure that their friends, the investment banks that brought us to the brink of ruin, they got money for nothing. In fact, got big bailouts. That was a bad day in American history, but Isaacs had the idea, look, you don't need to take taxpayer money. If you will just say the United States Congress should pass a bill that says anything we declare to be a troubled company or a troubled asset is invested in by American companies, American individuals who have earned money overseas, never brought it into the country. If they will bring that money from those foreign countries and invest it in what Congress labels as troubled, they'll pay no tax on that money, bringing it into the country. Then we'll probably have $1 trillion come in. You won't need the $700 billion of taxpayer money or borrowed money from China to bail out the banks. You'll have Americans that will invest in those with money they earned overseas. You don't need TARP. And it won't be the government getting into bed with the big banks and the terrible precedent that will set. That was a great idea. But Paulson was so determined to let his enemies like Lehman Brothers go bankrupt without help and to allow his company, Goldman Sachs, to be the big dog, that he didn't want to do Isaac's idea. And he convinced enough members of the House, both Republican and Democrat, to give him $700 billion because he needed a really big number. Well, President Trump had that similar idea. Let's allow American money to come into America. It's earned overseas. And that will get our economy going because Americans will bring this money in and it'll be great for the economy. That's what we need to get the economy going. Well, little did we know that years before, candidate Donald Trump had the idea of bringing in American-earned money in foreign countries to America to get our economy going. You had Hillary Clinton with the idea of selling off our national security to get mega millions to go to the Clinton Foundations, her and her husband's bank account, to get the economy going in America. Wow, that was a great idea, wasn't it? We sell off some of our national security to bring in foreign money, specifically Russian money, to get our economy going. And if she had been elected president, then the cover-up that Mueller and Rosenstein did of the original investigation into Russia's efforts to corruptly buy American uranium and corner the market, that would continue to be covered up. And wow, what a great deal. Even though Hillary Clinton did not win the election, Donald Trump did, and they got Donald Trump's Attorney General to recuse himself so that Rosenstein, a guy that participated in covering up the original FBI investigation, could appoint someone else who helped cover up that original uranium investigation with the Russians and make him special counsel so that not only would he make a lot of money and get to work with lots of people he liked that hated Trump and loved Hillary, but he could also cover up the prior cover-up even though Hillary didn't get elected. Amazing, the kind of stuff that's coming out now. The work that John Solomon and the Hill have done been extraordinary. He's got an article from October 25th that the FBI informant in the Obama-era Russian nuclear bribery was cleared to testify before Congress. That is great news. Despite Mueller and Rosenstein's efforts to keep their prior Russia investigation that they covered up so that the Russia uranium deal could go through, wow, we get to find out about that now that the FBI informant has been cleared under the current Justice Department under Jeff Sessions. We'll get to find out more about that Russia effort to corner the market using U.S. uranium. And an article from Fox News, gag order lifted. DOJ says informant can speak to Congress on Uranium One, Russia bribery case with Clinton links. And then I was glad to see a friend down the hall, Chuck Grassley, senator there from Iowa. He's calling for special counsel in the Uranium One scandal. Of course that's appropriate. Fox News article that Clinton is mum on fusion GPS scandal as the Dems dossier, the Democrats' dossier denials pile up. That's from October 26. So now there are indications the Democratic National Committee may have actually paid for this fictitious dossier that could be used to get warrants political opponents in a presidential race. This is incredible, absolutely incredible. Even going back to Tammany Hall, as far as I can recall, they didn't have an FBI director and a attorney general or a deputy attorney general that had helped cover up a prior investigation so that their friends could make millions of dollars. Let's see, there's an article from the New York Times, Joe Becker and Don Van Natta Jr. This goes back January 31 of 2008, indicating that late September 6, 2005, a private plane carrying the Canadian mining financier Frank Giuster touched down in Almaty, a ruggedly picturesque city in southeast Kazakhstan. Several hundred miles to the west, a fortune awaited, highly coveted deposits of uranium that could fuel nuclear reactors around the world. And Mr. Giuster was in hot pursuit of an exclusive deal to tap them. Unlike more established competitors, Mr. Giuster, I'll just say Mr. G, was a newcomer to uranium mining in Kazakhstan, former Soviet Republic. But what his fledgling company lacked in experience, it made up for in connections. Accompanying Mr. G on his luxuriously appointed MD-87 jet that day was a former president of the United States, Bill Clinton. Upon landing on the first stop of a three-country philanthropic tour, the two men were whisked off to share a sumptuous midnight banquet with Kazakhstan's president, whose 19-year-old stranglehold on the country had all but quashed political dissent. Another man walked away from the table with a propaganda coup after Mr. Clinton expressed enthusiastic support for the Kazakh leader's bid to head an international organization that monitors elections and supports democracy. Mr. Clinton's declaration undercut both American foreign policy and sharp criticism of Kazakhstan's poor human rights record by, among others, Mr. Clinton's wife, Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton of New York. Within 2 days, corporate records show that Mr. G also came up with a winner when his company signed preliminary agreements giving it the right to buy into 3 uranium projects controlled by Kazakhstan's state-owned uranium company. So it's just incredible. The deeper you get in this stuff, the more it smells. Wall Street Journal article, written by Holman Jenkins, Jr., the FBI's political meddling. Interesting story, and I like the way it starts because it starts referencing a movie, I believe, but let's give plausible accounts of the known facts, then explain why demands that Robert Mueller recusing himself from the Russia investigation may not be the fanciful partisan grandstanding you imagine. Here's a story consistent with what has been reported in the press. How reliably reported is uncertain. But Democratic political opponents of Donald Trump financed a British former spook who spread money among contacts in Russia, who in turn over drinks solicited stories from their supposedly connected sources in Moscow. If these people were really connected in any meaningful sense, then they made sure the stories they spun were consistent with the interests of the regime, if not actually scripted by the regime. The resulting Trump dossier then became a factor in Obama administration's to launch an FBI counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign and after the election to trumpet suspicions of Trump collusions with Russia. We know of a second, possibly even more consequential way the FBI was effectively a vehicle for Russian meddling in U.S. politics. Authoritative news reports say FBI Chief James Comey's intervention in the Hillary Clinton email matter was prompted by a Russian intelligence document that his colleagues suspected was a Russian plant. Goes on to say, okay, Mr. Mueller was a former close colleague and leader, but no longer part of the FBI when these events occurred. This may or may not make him a questionable person to lead a Russian meddling investigation in which the FBI's own actions are necessarily a concern. But now we come to the Rosatom disclosures last week in the Hill. Here's another story as plausible as we can make it based on credible reporting. After the Cold War, in its own interest, the U.S. wanted to build bridges to the Russian nuclear establishment. The Putin government, for national or commercial purposes, agreed and sought to expand its nuclear business in the U.S. Purchase and consolidation of certain assets were facilitated by Canadian entrepreneurs who gave large sums to, drumroll, the Clinton Foundation and perhaps arranged a Bill Clinton speech in Moscow for $500,000. A key transaction had to be approved by Hillary Clinton's State Department. How about that? Now we learn that before and during these transactions, the FBI had uncovered a bribery and kickback scheme involving Russia's nuclear business, and also received reports of Russian officials seeking to curry favor through donations to the Clinton Foundation. This criminal activity was apparently not disclosed to agencies vetting the 2010 transfer of U.S. commercial nuclear assets to Russia. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I refer to the original FBI and DOJ cover-up involving Mr. Rosenstein and Mr. Mueller, which was going to be able to be covered up. That's so we understand the plot here. Mueller as FBI director, Rosenstein working as U.S. attorney or deputy U.S. attorney, whatever he was at the time. It's interesting. I hear a rumor that he may have even signed on part of the sealing documents to help cover up the original investigation. It'll be interesting to see if he did that. Wow. If it turns out he signed off to get the FBI investigation documents sealed, and Mueller, as FBI director, was charting the course to get this thing sealed, covered up, well, the guys that did the cover-up are in charge of the investigation, which would allow them to cover up their prior cover-up, which would look bad since they covered it up to allow the Hillary Clinton approved deal selling United States security via our uranium to Russia. And I didn't realize how bad Russia was until my friends across the aisle and Secretary Clinton, candidate Clinton, defeated Clinton, kept talking about how bad Russia was. Well, they about convinced me. But this article says the criminal activity was apparently not disclosed to agencies vetting the 2010 transfer of U.S. commercial nuclear assets to Russia. The FBI made no move to break up the scheme until long after the transaction closed. Only 5 years later, the Justice Department in 2015 disclosed a plea deal with the Russian perpetrator so quietly that its significance was missed until the Hill reported on the FBI investigation last week. They almost, if not for the good work of Mr. Solomon, I think somebody else at the Hill, might have been missed entirely. So good work. There are some potential Woodwards and Bernsteins out there, in addition to the hardworking news investigators with places like the Daily Caller and Judicial Watch, Conservative Review, and others. But the article says the agency, when Mr. Mueller headed it, soft-pedaled an investigation highly embarrassing to Mrs. Clinton, as well as the Obama-Russia reset policy. All right, then I yield back. There's more to come, I'm